Have you ever felt anxious about something? Maybe it was something that someone said or something you saw on social media. Or maybe you're wondering, will you ever get married? Or how will you afford rising gas prices? If you're anything like me, you've experienced anxiety in so many different areas of life. But what is anxiety and how do we deal with it as Christians? Let's talk about it. Hey ladies, welcome to Her Journey with God. I'm Sarah, and today I want to talk about anxiety because anxiety is actually part of almost everyone's life at some point or another. Situations happen and we find ourselves anxious and worried and unsettled. It's important to know what anxiety is, where it comes from, and how to deal with it. And so today I want to start by talking about the difference between stress and anxiety. That way we can recognize anxiety when it happens. So stress is defined as pressure or tension exerted on a material object or a state of mental or emotional strain or tension resulting from adverse or very demanding circumstances. So stress is like pressure coming from our situations. So there's good stress and there's bad stress. Good stress is often called eustress. Eustress is defined as moderate or normal psychological stress, interpreted as being beneficial. So good eustress can be things like schoolwork or going to the gym. It's pressure and tension that's put on us in our situations, but it's good for us. It's difficult, but it helps us grow in different ways. Now, there's also bad stress, which is called distress. Distress is defined as extreme anxiety, sorrow, or pain. Distress can be things like a car accident or the loss of a loved one. It can be a really stressful situation, really difficult, something you weren't expecting that can just feel kind of crushing. That's the definition of bad stress. So good stress and bad stress, but stress as a whole is tension or pressure from outside sources, whether good and beneficial or really difficult and really hard. Anxiety is defined as a feeling of worry, nervousness, or unease, typically about an imminent event or something with an uncertain outcome. So stress comes from the outside, from tension and pressure put on us from our circumstances, but anxiety is like an inner turmoil. It's an unease, a worry about our situations or unknown events that might happen. It's not necessarily tied to things that are actually happening, but something that might happen. But where does anxiety come from? So if it's a feeling of worry or unease about an event or uncertain outcome, an example of anxiety for me was when I used to work in TV production in Los Angeles, and I worked really crazy hours, maybe even 14-hour days sometimes, 6 days a week at one point, and that was a lot of stress on my body. But I wasn't necessarily anxious about it, but I had stress because it was difficult. It was a challenging season. But later, I moved from working in production over to a finance department position. And when I worked there, I had a lot less stress from outward situations, like I was making enough money to pay my bills, I had more stable work hours, and yet I had this inner sense of anxiety and turmoil because I was wondering if this was the job that God wanted me to have. I had this anxiety about, am I in the right place? Did I make a wrong decision? Is this really what I should be doing with my life? And so even though my situation was going fine and, there was just a normal amount of work stress, there's always going to be some stress and some tension in your life because we're not promised an easy ride as Christians. We're promised that in this life we will have trouble, we will have challenge, we will have stress. But Jesus says we can be of good cheer because Jesus has overcome the world. And so the difference here between my stress and my anxiety was that now my anxiety, after I had changed jobs, my anxiety wasn't from outward sources anymore. It was inward for me. It was tied to my belief system about God and myself, because I was worried that I was in the wrong place. I was worried that I had made a wrong step, or I was worried that I hadn't figured out what God wanted me to do, and that maybe I was in the wrong place. Maybe there was something I still needed to be doing that I wasn't doing that God expected me to do. And so often my anxiety for me has come from my belief systems being just off track, not understanding who God is and who I am to Him and what He actually asks me to do. And so sometimes our belief systems can lead to anxiety in our lives. That anxiety isn't the same thing as stress, which is a normal part of life, and sometimes can be good stress or bad stress, which is just tension or pressure in our lives. But sometimes the internal stuff, the anxiety, is what we battle with the most. Well, anxiety can come from all different kinds of sources. It can come from a worry about whether or not you'll ever get married. Maybe you saw something on social media that made you anxious. Maybe you saw a big life update and something that hasn't happened for you yet, but has happened for them. And maybe you feel anxious about where you're at in life because you feel like you're not quite measuring up to that. Maybe you're worried that you'll be single for the rest of your life. Maybe you haven't met that significant other yet and you thought you would be in a different place by now. A job promotion. Maybe you're worried that someone else is going to get that promotion and you're feeling anxious about whether or not it's going to happen for you. Maybe it's financial. Maybe you're wondering how you're going to pay for gas prices that are going up. Or maybe you're getting married and you're worried about how you're going to measure up to your fiance's expectations of who you're supposed to be. Or maybe you can't even explain anxiety. Maybe you don't even know where it comes from. Maybe it doesn't fit in any category that you're aware of. You're just feeling this overall sense of anxiety and uncertainty about the future, maybe worry or unease or instability. Maybe you just have this feeling that nothing is going right. Now, it could just be stress. It could just be the tension of the reality of life and that situation that is actually changing. Or it can be anxiety, which is the worry about it. So we can be in a situation that is stressful and that deals with change, but we don't have to worry. And that's where we cross from stress into anxiety, when we choose to allow something to affect us inwardly. And it can be our situation that is actually changing, or it can just be thoughts that we have, the what ifs, what if this happens, that we start to worry about it. And so anxiety can come from things that actually are happening in our lives or things that haven't happened and that we're just worried about. For me, my belief system, I was worried that I was stepping out of God's will, that I was in the wrong place, and I just was trying to figure that out. Anxiety can have so many different sources, but the reality is it's just a worry, an uneasiness, an inner turmoil or instability. Maybe there isn't a situation in your life that you can pinpoint and say, this is what I'm worried about. This is why I feel uneasy. Maybe you just feel uneasy and you don't even know how to put words to it. Maybe it could be a lot of things put together. The loss of a loved one years ago. It could be not being in the place you wanted to be at in this season of life. It can be a breakup. It can be financial aspects, so many different things, even all at once, that could cause anxiety. But the question is, when we recognize that we're anxious or worried or nervous, how do we respond to that as Christians? And what I truly believe is that all of these different areas of life that we deal with really gets back to the lack of confidence in who God is. The anxiety I shared earlier about my job situation, where I felt worried that I was in the wrong place, that I was stepping out of God's will, that I hadn't figured out what job He wanted me to do, it also was really rooted in the lack of confidence in God, that God was walking with me, that He was helping me navigate my life in different areas, and that He would be faithful to get me where I needed to go, that He would direct my paths as I trusted in Him. And so my lack of confidence led to worry. My lack of confidence in Him led me to worry about making the wrong decisions, making the wrong steps, taking the wrong job. And so that anxiety too, I believe, was also rooted in a lack of confidence that God was walking with me. And I want to look at a few passages today that can remind us of the confidence that we have in God. Confidence is described as the feeling or belief that one can rely on someone or something. Often when we feel anxious about something, it's because we're relying on ourselves. We're wondering how we're going to work it out or what's going to happen, what we're going to do. And we forget that we can rely on God, that God is with us in every situation. As Christians, He walks beside us to help us. It's so important for us as believers to maintain our confidence. It does not mean that we will not feel anxiety. We will, because we are human, we have flaws, we will struggle. We will at times feel anxious. That's a normal part of life. But what we do next is our choice. I really believe that so many of these different aspects of anxiety that we experience really comes back to the root of lack of confidence in God. Instead of putting our confidence in God, we often put it in our situations. We expect our situations to go well, but we have never been promised that everything will go well for us in this life. Even as Christians, we're not promised an easy ride. So while our situations may not be easy, it may be very difficult even at times, we can put our confidence in God and not in ourselves and not in our situations. And so I want to look at a passage from the book of Numbers. In Numbers chapter 14, we see 12 spies coming back from the promised land. The Israelites had sent these spies into the promised land to spy out the situation because God was taking the Israelites into the promised land to inhabit it, to have that land for their own possession. But there were people already in the land, and so the Israelites were going to have to fight battles. They were going to have to go in and take that land that God was giving them. So these 12 spies were coming back after they had looked at the land and they had seen what was going to have to happen, the battles that they were going to have to fight to take the land. And 10 of the spies came back with very negative reports, and they were like, we should have stayed in Egypt. Why did God bring us out here? Because there's no way we're going to win these battles. There's just no way that when we go into this land that we're going to come out alive. It's just not going to happen for us. And so these 10 spies had very negative reports, even though it was such a beautiful land with such abundance. They thought there's no way we're going to be able to do this. But Joshua and Caleb, the other two spies that went in with this group, they came back with a very favorable report. They talked about the goodness of the land, and they didn't talk about how they should have stayed in Egypt or the danger that they were about to face, but they talked about how God was giving them this land and how they could do it. They could fight these battles and take this land that God wanted to give them. And so let's look at Numbers chapter 14, verse 6. And Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had spied out the land, tore their clothes and said to all the congregation of the people of Israel, the land which we passed through to spy it out is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, He will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land that flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not fear the people of the land, for they are bread for us. Their protection is removed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them. Then all the congregation said to stone them with stones, but the glory of the Lord appeared at the tent of meeting to all the people of Israel. And so when the 10 spies came back and gave their report, Israel was distraught. All of the people just thought, there's no way we can do this. Joshua and Caleb give their report, and the people want to stone them because of their favorable report of how God is with them, that they can go in and fight those battles and it's going to be okay. And I think, how often are we like the people of Israel who listened to the 10 spies? Maybe we are like those 10 spies, not just hearing the report of what someone says and believing it and fearing for that we're alone, that God's not helping us, that we would have been better off somewhere else. Maybe we're like those 10 spies who give the unfavorable report. We talk about the situation and how negative it is. How much better would it be to be like Joshua and Caleb and to put full confidence in God, the God who brought the Israelites through the Red Sea and across the Jordan River, the God who never failed them, who always delivered them from their battles, who went before them to fight for them in so many miracles. The same God was about to fight their battles with them in the Promised Land. And how often are we like those people who just think, no, God's not going to fight this battle. This is too big. It's not going to happen. We worry needlessly. We ruminate on things that we don't even need to worry about. We can have stress in our lives without crossing the line into needlessly worrying about it. And I know how difficult it is sometimes when you have anxiety to feel like you're stuck there. It feels like, how do you even get out of anxiety? But I really believe it comes back to a confidence in God. Just like God had called the Israelites out of Egypt to go into the Promised Land, God is calling us as believers into a walk of faith with Him, to be trusting God that He is going to walk beside us, walk with us, that He's with us in our daily battles, because life has daily battles. We have challenging situations, discouragement, loss, all the challenges we face on a daily basis. God has promised to walk with us through them. Another passage that I want to look at today to remind us that our confidence is in God and not in ourselves or our situations. It comes from the book of Daniel, chapter 3, starting in verse 16. This is the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, 3 men who refused to bow down to an idol and worship it. And so they're about to be punished by death in a fiery furnace. And here's what they have to say. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and He will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. I think it's so important that we remember these 3 things: that God can deliver us. He is fully able to deliver us from any situation, just like He did end up delivering Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego out of that fiery furnace. He is able to do things in our lives to deliver us. And we can believe that He will do it, that He wants to deliver us and do good things in our lives. But just like these 3 faithful men said, even if He doesn't, we will still choose to do what's right. We will still worship the Lord our God, because God doesn't always act in our timing. Our situations don't always get easier. As Christians, we still go through difficulty, and yet we can trust, just like these 3 men, that God is still good. He's still working behind the scenes in ways that we don't understand to do good things in our lives, even if it doesn't have the outward appearance of being the good that we would want or expect. We can trust that God is so good that He knows exactly what we need, and that He's walking with us through every circumstance. So we've got to remember that God is able, that He will, and if He doesn't, He's still good. When we start to worry about our situation or something that has or hasn't even happened yet, we can look back to the scripture, because God gives us an instruction of what to do when we experience anxiety. This is what God says to do. In 1 Peter chapter 5, starting in verse 7, it says, casting all your anxieties on Him, because He cares for you. Be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. God says to cast your anxieties on Him. He literally says to, the meaning of the word cast means to throw your anxieties on God, because He cares for you. We were never meant to carry all of the weight of the worry of our situations. We have stress in our lives, but it doesn't mean that we have to cross the line into worry and anxiety about it. We can give God our cares and our worries and anxieties and trust that He is the one that is strong enough to carry them. Just like the Israelites were not necessarily strong enough to fight the battles that they were headed into. They couldn't trust in themselves. They were looking at themselves to think, we're not capable of doing this thing. It's too big for us. What they weren't looking at is that they forgot that God was with them. That's what Joshua and Caleb were trying to remind the people of. God is with us. He is helping us. He's going to fight these battles with us. We're not alone. And so God wants us to cast our cares on Him, our worries, when we do face those battles and when we see those battles that are coming. And life is full of battles to fight, challenges, unexpected situations. Life is full of it. And so when we encounter those situations that start to cause us to feel worry and anxiety, we can choose to trust that God is walking through it with us, that He has not left us, and that He is fighting our battles with us. Friends, I hope this was helpful today. I know how hard it can be sometimes when we're looking at ourselves and our situations for stability, how hard it can be to look back to God and to remember that He's still with us. And I really believe that all of these things that we face in life, if we would keep casting those cares on God, we would experience more peace and joy. It doesn't mean that we won't feel those thoughts of worry from time to time and that feeling of anxiety. It will come back sometimes. But the good news is we can keep casting that care on God when it does come back. When we do step from stress into anxiety, when we cross that line and say, this situation is so big, we can still, again, bring it back to God and cast that care on Him again, because God truly cares for us. So I hope this was encouraging. I'm praying for you. God bless you.